We're live.
G'day.
Hello.
What are you doing?
We're going to give a talk in about 10 minutes.
So join us in 10 minutes and we'll have a yarn with Jared Spool.
There we go. See you there.
Hey, pay attention now. We're going to start tonight. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land in which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. On that note, welcome here to ThoughtWorks as well, who host us tonight. Tonight we are kicking off Sydney Design Thinking number 46! That's right! Thank you. This meetup is only possible with the amazing community, which is you beautiful people. The people that also for some reason love us and help us, like the volunteers that we keep roping in to help us on the doors. So that would be a Kyle, a Lavon. You guys here? Can you put your hands up?
Much still be done.
Some people as well. Hey, we've got a Rosen again. Yeah, so these guys are some students who are studying at the moment, I believe, and they're super. We also have our wonderful people from, well, we also have Nathan, who I think he just likes playing with cameras.
And other things.
He likes things, but he's amazing. He's also been a wonderful support for us tonight. So tonight we are in fact streaming, so no added pressure. And we'll be recording. Thanks, Matt.
You hit play, right? You hit record?
I did.
Okay, we're good now. Did you?
I'm going to double check now.
We also want to thank our amazing sponsors. So that is ThoughtWorks, and they're fantastic. They have arranged as well for they've sponsored our amazing speaker tonight, which we'll get to. But that's largely thanks to Meaghan, Kate, Shiraz, Ian, you're all here not putting their hands up, obviously. Thank you. And also our organising committees. That's Kingsley, Ben, Lucas, James. You guys are here, aren't you?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so confidence failing. And also, I mean, it's fine though, because let's be honest, Kate Linton, who is of ThoughtWorks and also one of our organisers, I mean, she pretty much showed how useless we are in organising this event. So she did a terrific job negotiating as well with ThoughtWorks to have tonight go off and have our wonderful guest. So on that note, to introduce and to explain some of the relationship and the background and how we even get to where we are, I'm going to hand over to Meaghan.
So normally this would be Kate here, but she had to be down in Melbourne looking after a client.
Thanks,
You know,
Kate.
that's what we do. So I'll let her know that all the love was there. Look, this is super exciting, and for me, so me personally, I have been in the whole UX, UI design, testing, research, design thinking product for a long time. And throughout every step of my career, there's been Jared Spool. And it's been... okay, not that long, maybe 10, but I think that this is that indicative of just what an impact he has had on our profession as a whole, and I think even broader. And it's been interesting watching the change in Jared's writing, which is probably the way that most of us know him, across and along that journey. I think as we've all moved from that world of kind of usability testing and user interface design into watching it have a broader organisational impact. And so I'm really excited to hear what's going to happen tonight and what you're going to talk about. And I think it's interesting. What I wanted us to say is ThoughtWorks early last year ended up partnering with Jared Spool to bring his UX strategy playbook workshops outside of North America. And part of that was because I think, as someone very clever once wrote, that real design works when we share together. And I think that's been pretty much a ThoughtWorks philosophy and why it made such a great partnership and why we are so happy to have him here. And I'll leave it up to Jared to take away and tell us all.
Hi. I'm an internet sensation and teen heartthrob, Jared Spool. Putting on an event like this takes a bunch of people, a whole lot of effort, and they've done a fantastic job, and I'm so pleased to be part of this. Let's make some noise for these folks. I'd like to take a moment and go back to a specific time in history. This moment actually started a sequence of events that changed how I think about user experience. And it was at this very minute, 8:08 on the 13th of January 2018, that 14 million people in the state of Hawaii got a message on their phone. An interesting message to get in the middle of the morning. And it was a traumatic thing for 14 million people to get on their phones. The thing that interested me once things quieted down, after 38 minutes later, the governor sent out a message saying that in fact there was no missile heading towards Hawaii, and that it was an accidental transmission. Immediately, we knew we had to start looking into it. It's a little known fact about our work that a chunk of our work is what we call UX forensics, where we actually take apart user experience problems that have caused some damage, in some cases death, in other cases panic, things that are traumatic, and we often are doing this because we know we'll be contacted by the press, or in some times we're hit up by the government, or we get brought into lawsuits, expert witness work, things like that. So we've done a lot of this work over the years, and so instinctively we knew this was something that was going to be on our radar, that people were going to reach out to us at some point, so we needed to understand what happened. So the first thing we did was we wanted to understand why. And when we talk about why, what we really want to get to is what could possibly be the root cause of this? What could be the key thing? Now, you're probably familiar with a practice that is common in user experience work and in business in general, which is known as the 5 whys. And the 5 whys is basically you just keep asking why over and over and over again, hoping to find your way down to a root cause. It turns out in forensics work, this is not a useful practice, but we tend not to use it. And the reason that it's not a helpful practice is that it assumes that whatever that first why is, it actually is the thing that leads you on the path, that there is no other alternative that could cause that. So it turns out there's another technique, which is much older than the 5 whys, known as a fishbone analysis. And a fishbone analysis is when you start with a problem definition and you start to think about, well, what are all the different things that could cause that problem? And then you branch off that and say, well, what are all the things that could cause those things to happen? And you do a detailed coverage of all the things that might happen. So that's what we started to do. And because of the internets, and in particular the Twitters, we were able to get a whole bunch of information pretty quickly. Within a day, we had gotten our hands on a picture of what was purported to be the screen that the operator had used when they accidentally sent out the message. And that screen looked like this. And if you look at this carefully, it's got a list of different messages, and there's one here that says, you can see there's a couple of Amber Alerts. Amber Alerts, I don't know if you have them here, out our way, Amber Alerts are an abduction. They're when usually a child has been abducted, often by a separated parent who's not supposed to have access to the child and takes off. And so there was a child named Amber who was abducted, and so now they're all called Amber Alerts. And they're probably the most common type of message because this is Hawaii. They have tsunami messages and high surf alert. But there are two messages here. There's this one here, PACOM CDW. PACOM stands for Pacific Command, and this is Civil Defense Ward, and state only, and then drill PACOM CDW state only. And so the going theory was that the person who was doing this was supposed to hit the drill one and accidentally clicked on that one, and you can see how that accident might happen. It's a pretty simple thing. Interestingly enough, this was published by one of the local papers, and for some reason the governor's office within an hour or so said, no, that is incorrect. That is not at all the screen that people were using. So one of the things that happened with this is that as soon as this was published, Design Twitter, which is, I don't know if you pay attention to Design Twitter. Design Twitter is this part of Twitter that gets very upset very easily. They went into full mama bear mode about this menu, thinking, oh my gosh, this is the worst design menu in the world. Who would ever create a design like this? And so they were relieved when the governor said, no, this isn't the design of the menu. This is. So we can look over at our false message going out, and we can start to say, okay, well maybe one reason that it went out was that it was poor menu design. Now Design Twitter also. Design Twitter and Security Ops Twitter immediately jumped in, and Security Ops Twitter was like, why would you let people do this without a password, right? All they've seen is that one screen, right? And apparently there's no password on the screen, so obviously you can send out messages to 14 million people without a password. So there was all this discussion of why is there no password, which actually is a simple answer. It's an emergency alert. The last thing you want is username and password does not match. So, not the thing you want in an emergency. So there's actually, we can get into this a little bit more. And then the other thing that Design Twitter immediately said was, well, obviously there was no confirmation, right? If you're going to send a message to 14 million people, you should have a message that says, you know, do you want to send this message to 14 million people? And so that was one thought here, that there should have been some sort of confirmation. And then development Twitter jumped in and talked about how there was no separate test mode. Everybody knows you should have a developer sandbox where you can test things, and then you have a user mode where you do things, and that those should be separate. And so that they launched with that argument, so we added that to our diagram. And then, of course, I love the one, there's no way to cancel the message. You should have a way to cancel the message. The laws of physics are involved here. Once a radio wave goes out, you cannot pull it back. So I liked that. That was there. So let's talk about a couple of these real quick. So you have to understand that a drill is different than a test, right? We don't have fire alarm tests, we have fire alarm drills. Now we do have fire alarm tests. Fire alarm tests are often done when the building is empty. We don't do, that's to make sure the fire alarms actually work, and they actually repeat them over and over again, and they check every floor to make sure every alarm goes off and that all the lights and sounds happen the way they're supposed to. That's a fire alarm test. A fire alarm drill you do when the building is full. And the purpose of the drill is so that everybody practices what they're supposed to do. You do enough drills, people will know in the real emergency what it is to do. So you actually do not want a separate process for a drill than for the actual thing. Because if you have a separate process, people will learn the wrong behaviors. You need them to do the same thing. And then you critique and you see, okay, did we do the drill well? And we found out. So the text mode thing doesn't make sense. And the other thing is, friction is problematic. We have to be careful about this because the time we're talking about here is short. Now, the Monday after the alarm, a professor at the University of Michigan, I believe, tweeted this, which caught our attention. And what this is he has found a video where the Hawaii State Warning Point, that's the Emergency Operations Center, demonstrated the way they send out messages, among other things in their operations. And they showed this screen of this software, which is a product called My State USA, that was, he says, this is the software that they were using. And of course, now there's even more discussion about how crappy the software is and the design of this and all of this. It turns out he was only sort of right. He was right that they demonstrated a video. The video had actually been made years before. And My State USA does not exist anymore. It was acquired by a company called AlertSense. And the actual screen of what they used looked like this. This is the product that Hawaii State Warning Point used to send out the message. And in fact, by looking at the screen and by our knowledge of how this software works, we were able to determine that A, there actually is a confirmation, there is a password required, all of those things are actually taken care of. And these are both screens from that software. This is a view of the files that exist because it's a cloud-based system, and what you do is you create messages and you put them in what's called a template. And you use that template in real time. So the templates are modified. So this is the list of available templates as if you would look at it in just an undressed HTML page, which is one mode that the software works in. And then this is a pull down that actually exists in the thing, which allows you to choose which template you want to use for the message you're about to send out. So both of these in turn turned out to be correct. And the key thing here that really clued us was, you can't see it very well, but there's the last few letters, just the bottom of those letters, but if you look closely, it's the word templates. And so our going theory at this point was that in fact this was a problem that we know very well. This is a problem of user-supplied file names. How many times have you opened the wrong file because the file name, you thought it was the right file, but it wasn't quite the right version, it wasn't, home screen sketch _final really .jpeg. It was supposed to be home page sketch final 2 really. And so we opened the wrong one, we used the wrong file, right? We've had this problem for years. This is something that's on us. We know that users are particularly bad at information architecture and that they don't think about the names they give to things, the implications of those names down the road, and as a result, these are very similar names, and it's easy to confuse them, particularly in an emergency situation. We also, by this time, had figured out what was going on at State Warning Point. The time of the message, 8:08, is really actually a big clue, because they have 8-hour shifts in the Emergency Operations Center. And there's a shift that starts at midnight, and there's a shift that starts at 8. And one of the things you do in an Emergency Operations Center, because you need to make sure that everything is working, is you run through a set of drills at a shift change. It's a common standard practice. So the fact that this message went out at 8:08 means this was part of the drill process that was happening at that time. And so whoever was the operator of the system at that point, our theory was that they picked the wrong file. They should have picked the drill file and not the actual file. And here's the thing. The files themselves know whether they're drill files or not, because in the template, it has the recipients of the message. You set that all up in advance. You're going to send it to everybody, or you're going to send it to just a small number of devices that are used for drill purposes. And the thing also knows what the message contents are. And it also knows other details about the message. So, in fact, we should not have any user-crafted file names. The file names should be composed by an algorithm to actually say what they are, and then organized appropriately by the algorithm to say exactly what they are, instead of showing up in some random order, or seemingly random order. That second one is alphabetical. The first one is in the order of creation. So that was our theory going into Monday afterwards. And so we can add that here, that basically the wrong template had been opened through this file error. And we pretty much stuck with that as our thinking as to where this was likely the most likely thing, until a few weeks later, when the New York Times published a story that said that it wasn't an accident. That in fact, the message was intentional. So that causes us to reopen the investigation, and we start to look at more details. And what we learn is that a lot of our theory was correct. That in fact, there was a drill, but it was not a standard drill. What had happened was a supervisor, the supervisor of State Warning Point, had decided that they needed to practice this a little bit more. So he decided to do a surprise drill. And the way he was going to do a surprise drill was that he was going to go into a conference room at the Emergency Operations Center after his shift. So he had just gotten off his shift. He was working the midnight to 8 shift. The new supervisor had come in. And he was going to simulate the whole process. And the way he was going to do this was he was going to call up the phone that is only to be used by Pacific Joint Operations Command and go through the whole procedure of what PACOM would do in the case of an emergency. And what he ended up doing was he went into the conference room, he called up, someone picked up the phone, but they didn't follow procedure. They're supposed to put it on speaker right away, but they didn't. They said, State Warning Point, and he proceeded through the script saying, this is a drill, and as he said, this is a drill, this is a drill. And as soon as the person on the phone heard that, he put it on the speakerphone, which is standard operating procedure, so the whole Warning Point staff could hear it, so they all could do the things they were supposed to be doing. But then he continued. He didn't repeat the phrase, this is a drill. He continued as if it was not a drill, so everybody else in the room did not hear this is a drill. And then, unfortunately, read from the script that they use for emergencies and actually said the words, this is not a drill. Because in a real emergency, you would say, this is not a drill. So, the operator of the emergency messaging system was not going to answer the phone, hears the warning, and follows procedure, and actually sends out the message. So now we have another problem, which is that the user didn't understand it was a drill. Unfortunately, someone at the state felt they needed a scapegoat for this. And they fired the operator, not the supervisor. Which, in my opinion, was the wrong person. I'm not sure either of them should have been fired, but definitely not the operator. But they claim there were other incidents and that there was a history of something, and this was just an excuse, I think. And so now we say, okay, I think we understand what happened. We've got the whole picture. And we started getting, we had been getting press inquiries all along. But then one came in from a guy named Martin Cass at NPR and set up an interview with him. And I'm prepared to sort of walk through this whole sequence of events with him. And he's done good work. He knows exactly what happened. And he's got a different angle on this, one that we hadn't heard before. And his angle was, why is this software made by some company? Why is AlertSense making this software? Why is this software not made by the government? Now, I had just finished a one-year tour working in the Obama White House for the U.S. Digital Service. So I'd worked in the White House on federal government websites and software projects. So I had about 1,000 reasons why the government should not be running this. But he wasn't interested in that. He was interested in how this software came to be and why this was a thing that we had outside people. And so we started to work together on this project to figure out, how did the software get to be? How did the emergency system start to happen? And he ended up doing some fascinating interviews. One person was the chief engineer for FEMA. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Association agency. They are in charge of emergencies, and they own the emergency management system along with the Federal Communications Commission. And so he talked to their chief engineer. This person's in charge of what's called the IPAWS system, which is the underlying system that sends out all these messages. It also is the one that controls highway signs, and it controls the sirens that happen in cities and tsunami sirens. And so it's this big integrated network. And the way the U.S. government works is some things are done at the federal level, some things are done at the state level. And this is one of those places where it's sort of both. The feds have created this network, but it's actually up to the states to manage it. He says, look, how the states use this is up to the states. And if the states need to be working on this. And Martin, the reporter, then interviewed some of the folks at the state level, and he told them these things that the federal guy was saying, like FEMA will tell states that there's a missile inbound and where it's going to land. Then the state will initiate any plans it has in place, one of which being to issue an alert to the public. So he's saying, look, the responsibility is divided. But when Martin talked to the folks at the state level, they were like, are you kidding me? Right? They can handle Amber Alerts. That makes sense. Amber Alerts are localized activities. But this is a national thing. And Francisco Sanchez, who's the deputy emergency manager coordinator for Harris County, which is one of the largest counties in Texas, says that he assumed that this message is going to come from the feds. Says military events are not something we envision or have within our scope or responsibilities for. So now we've got another thing that's on our chart, which is there's no clear authority as to who's supposed to send out the message. So now to understand how this got here, we have to go back even further to the November before the alert went out. And in November before the alert went out, the state of Hawaii decided to put together a new emergency preparedness plan, their first one in 10 years. They decided to update it. The reason they decided to update it then is that it was that month that our president and the leader of North Korea were having a Twitter conversation about whose buttons were bigger. And this scared the hell out of Hawaii. Because if somebody's going to press one of their buttons, Hawaii is the closest place to land a missile. So Hawaii starts to ask the question, what would that even be like? And they put together this 35-page emergency preparedness plan, which talks about all the types of emergencies, but 27 pages are about this nuclear missile strike and what they have to do to prepare. And it's a fascinating report. And it turns out that, as I mentioned, timing is an issue. You see, if a missile were to take off in North Korea, it would take a full 5 minutes for PACOM to actually recognize that this is a missile that could be coming towards the United States, that could be heading towards Hawaii. It'll take 5 full minutes to do that. And that's because PACOM has stations on the South Korean peninsula. If we were to pull those stations, as the president's been threatening to do, off the peninsula, it would go to 15 minutes. Now, that gives State Warning Point 5 minutes to actually do the things they need to do to put the alert into operation and to start emergency operations. Which unfortunately leaves the public with 10 minutes to somehow prepare for an incoming missile, because the whole thing will land within 20 minutes. And here's the thing. PACOM can't tell if it's a nuclear missile. It could be just an empty missile, because they've been shooting those things off as tests. It could be a missile with a conventional warhead, or it could have a nuclear warhead. And you can't tell until it lands. So there's a 20-minute countdown. That's all the time we have to deal with this. I'm going to guess it's not a whole lot longer for y'all. But you haven't been bullying the leader of North Korea on Twitter lately, have you? Some days I feel like we're just dealing with 5-year-olds.
5-year-olds got more sense.
Yeah. Okay, 10-year-old. Francisco Sanchez, the head of emergency services for Harris County, said, 18 minutes before a missile gets here, who am I going to call at the Department of Defense if I get that alert on my phone to verify this is real? Who can I get a confirmation and a double confirmation from to make sure this is an authentic alert? This isn't the result of a hack. This isn't a mistake. By the time I've done that, something's gone boom. He's absolutely right? The timing here is critical. Now, to understand how this emergency alert system works, we actually have to go back to the 1960s. In the 1960s, the United States put something together called the Emergency Broadcast System. It was part of the Cold War, and it was this system that occurred on television and on radio. And it's a fascinating system just to understand how it actually worked, because the whole thing was analog. At that point, remember, there were no computers really, or modems or networks to transmit things. So the way it worked was you would, some television station would actually broadcast a message that looked like this and sounded like this.
This is a test. This station is conducting a test of the emergency broadcasting system. This is only a test.
Now those two tones you hear, you're hearing two different frequencies. Those are especially tuned such that there are devices that exist in every television and radio station that are just listening to another channel for those two tones. And when they hear those two tones, they then engage a similar system that actually repeats the message that was there. And the message just keeps repeating over and over and over again. And it propagates its way through the entire country by listening to other TV and radio stations and repeating the message, just like this.
The broadcasters of your area, in voluntary cooperation with federal, state, and local authorities, have developed this system to keep you informed in the event of an emergency. If this had been an actual emergency, the attention signal you've just heard would have been followed by official information, news, or instructions.
So those instructions would be recorded and repeated down the line, one step at a time. And this was the other device that was used. This is an old teletype machine. And all of the messages were stored on pre-composed paper tapes, which they called templates. That's what the system was like in the 60s. This is what the system looks like today. It's a far more sophisticated system using cell phones and television and highway signs and sirens and various websites. It's coordinated with the Weather Bureau, and this whole thing is how messages are disseminated. This portion of the chart here is how messages are created. And it turns out that organizations can tap into the iPod system and have their own access to it to send out their own messages. So for example, if you're a university, you can have a way of sending it to everybody who's in the geographic region of the university. And therefore you can have emergency systems that are the same, consistent across, whether you're at a small area. So companies can use this on their campuses, universities can use it on campuses, you can do it at the county level, you can do it at the city level, you can do it at the state level. And so when, for example, you have, brush fires nearby, you can localize the messages to where there is damage without panicking people for which they're not going to be affected. And so this allows you to do that. Now, the government being the government, they did not want to write the software for the system, so they created this group of companies that have to meet approval through the Department of Homeland Security. They call these alert origination software vendors. And they are companies that have met the standards of using the system and have been certified by FEMA to do that. And there are 23 of them, of which AlertSense is just one of the vendors. And if we look at this from a sort of organizational perspective, what we see is we've got Hawaii State Warning Point. They're the ones who sent out the message. They work for the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. That's their mother organization. On the federal side, we've got PACOM, we've got FEMA, and we've got the Federal Communications. And then we've got 23 different alert software vendors. And what Martin Cass from NPR wanted to understand was, who's actually responsible? And that question really sort of started us down this path of trying to understand what does it mean to design in this environment. Now, by design, what I mean is the rendering of intent. This is the definition that I've been using for a while now for design. It's a nice, simple definition. A designer, doesn't matter what kind of designer they are, has an intention of making a change in the world, and then the way they make the change is the rendering. So the rendering of intention is what we're doing here. But the problem is, whose intent? Who gets to define what the intention is? And that question is the thing that sort of set us in a whole different direction. Something new that we hadn't thought about for a really long time. Because we didn't understand how you design in this environment. What would be our recommendation for what to do? Martin kept asking me, well, what would you recommend folks do? And I didn't know. There's a word, it's called governance. Governance is who owns the intent. It's the owning of intent. And the question that we came to is, who owns intention when we have multiple organizations with no one organization in the leadership position? They have to coordinate, they have to collaborate. And that's the question that we set out for. This is Ray and Charles Eames. And they are amazing designers. You have all sat in chairs that they have designed. Actually, some of you are sitting in chairs that look like the ones they designed, but I think they're knockoffs.
No, they're not.
Okay, they're not.
They're competitors.
Herman Miller's a competitor. Actually, Herman Miller worked for the Eames and then became a competitor. A little known fact. But they did lots of great things. One of the things they did, which many of you may be old enough to remember seeing this in school, was a movie called The Powers of 10. This was a movie they made in 1968 for IBM. And it's a really cool movie, and it's 7 minutes long, and I highly recommend you Google it and watch the YouTube video of it. It's excellent. But basically what the movie is about is it puts together this sort of notion of perspective. And it shows this couple sitting on a blanket on the grass, and it tells us that there's a camera that's been placed such that the center of the thing is basically 1 meter in diameter. And then the movie starts to pull the camera back, and it stops at the point where we are at 10 meters in diameter, so we can see that they're in a much bigger area of grass, and then it pulls back again at 100 meters, and it keeps going back by powers of 10. And now we see at 100 meters that they're in some sort of park that's next to a marina, and then they pull back again, and we can see that they are in the Chicago area near the Great Lakes, near Lake Michigan, and we pull back to 1,000,000 meters, and we can see the entire planet, and we can pull back to 100,000 light years, and we can see the galaxy that's stored in this. And then the movie then also starts to zoom back in, and it goes down to 10 to the minus 14, down to the atomic level. And it basically shows you what the whole universe looks like at all these different levels of perspective. And I've always loved this movie. It's very cool. And I immediately sort of jumped to this when we were starting to understand this problem of governance. And one of the things that jumped out to me about the movie, as I was thinking about it, was that the tools you use have to change depending on the resolution, the power of 10 resolution that you're at. Right? If we just want to sort of look out at the stars, we can do that with a simple telescope. But if we want to hone in to a particular star, we have to have a more powerful telescope. And the further we want to hone in, the more powerful the telescope we have to use. So we actually have to change our tools based on the resolution we want to focus on, because a particular tool is set for a particular resolution. So this idea that we need different tools was intriguing. But then we started thinking about this a little bit more. And we came to this realization that not only do the tools change, but the problem changes. Let's take the problem of pollution. If we think about pollution at that 10 to the 1 meter level, what we're talking about is pollution in the park. We're talking about, in essence, a litter problem. And the solution might be better trash cans or recycling or something, collection device there. But if we zoom out to the city level, now what we're looking at is trash and landfill management. It's a completely different set of problems that we're working about. We're no longer thinking about what does a trash can look like and where do we place it. We're thinking about whole systems that are happening there. And if we pull out again to the whole planet level, well, now we get to climate change, or at least we used to. We're not allowed to go there anymore. And if we pull out even further and we start looking at the planet from outer space, well, now we have an issue of space junk and space trash, which is moving at 17,000 miles per hour in orbit around our nation. And the thing is that the resolutions all have different problems. And each resolution demands a different type of solution. So now, if we think of design as the rendering of intent, we can, thinking about this from that Eames perspective, we can say, well, at different resolutions, our intentions have to be different. And that means that the way we render those intentions have to be different. But here's the interesting thing. The idea that design is the rendering of intent, that does not change. That is a constant, no matter what resolution we're working at. I started in this field in the late 70s, early 80s. And in 1984, Sydney Smith and Jane Mosier published a book that changed the way we did design forever. And it was this book. It was called Guidelines for Designing User Interface Software. It was paid for by the United States Air Force. And it was a 244-page document that basically created guidelines on how to create screens for this. This is an IBM 3270 terminal. And this was the state of the art. The common vernacular for these types of screens were green screens. And that was because they were green screens. They used a green phosphor. Sometimes they used an amber phosphor, but no one ever called them amber screens. But this was it. And the problem was that the technology at that time, which was mostly designed by developers, glad that's changed. That technology, the screens were often not designed well. They were not designed with any patterns. And so there had been all this research that had been done in the late 70s and early 80s on how to design these things better. And Sid and Jane decided to compile those things into this book. And it was this is basically the first known version of a library. And what they did was they described each basic problem, like how to prompt for what the field length should be for, and how you tell somebody what the field length is. And they show good examples and bad examples and give references to various human factors studies that have been done. And in the process of compiling this stuff, they actually came up with 5 basic principles of good data entry. That you should have consistency for data entry transactions, minimal input actions by the user, minimal memory load on users, compatibility of data entry with the data display, flexibility for user-controlled data entry. And what's fascinating to me is, even though this was written in 1984, these are still present-day rules for designing a screen. Right? This is good, solid practice here. And so, while we don't have screens that look like this very often anymore, we still have some, they often look more like this or like this. Those basic principles still apply. They still work. And so if we wanted to put this in the model of the Eames stuff, we could say this is sort of that 10 to the 1 resolution. And we would call this the screen-wide resolution. And today we would call this UI design, right? And we have a whole bunch of tools that are very specific to UI design. And these were designed for this resolution. And this is what we use. We have components and guidelines, and we have usability testing, and we have heuristics, which I'm not a huge fan of. But that was the origin of this. The thing is that once we sort of mastered the screen stuff, we realized, well, this stuff, we often now have multiple screens. And we had to start thinking about how screens hang together and how we organize things across screens and what the flows of those things are. And we now started to have to come up with ways of representing all these different screens and all the different ways we lay out a website and all the different pages and the flows that happen within them. And this is a different set of tools because it's solving a different set of problems. We've now pulled the camera out a little farther, and we are now working at the application or site level. And we are now seeing multiple screens put together. And here we are thinking about what we would now call UX design and information architecture. And the tools here, sitemaps and wireframes, card sorting, and user research, these are tools we use at this resolution. And it doesn't obsolete the things we were doing at the screen resolution because we're still making screens. But we now have two different resolutions. Now, if we pull the camera back again, we start to think about, well, how do multiple apps or multiple websites work in conjunction with each other? And what happens in between the apps and those things? And we start to think in terms of blueprints and journey maps and stakeholder diagrams. And now we're at a different resolution. We're now at an organizational wide resolution. The camera is now farther out. And we are dealing with what we would now call service or experience design. And here we have different set of tools. We've got user journeys and design systems and ethnographic research and design thinking. Again, not so thrilled about design thinking. So we have these different resolutions. All these things exist in parallel, just like the park and the city and the planet exist in parallel. And it's where we're focusing at the time. These aren't separate things, they aren't conflicting things, they aren't something has replaced something. They are all there simultaneously. And as we were thinking about this, we had an epiphany, which is if we go back to our diagram, the first problems that were reported were all screen level problems. The second set were application resolution problems. The third set were organization level problems. And then there was this one. What the hell was that? Right? So we gave it a name. We call it ecosystem-wide. And so, making something up here, you heard it here first. Ecosystem design. This is where all the hot jobs will be. And we have no idea what the tools are. Absolutely none. We just don't know, right? In 1984, we didn't know what the tools were for UI design. And in the 1990s, we didn't know what the tools were for what became information architecture and screen level design, right? We didn't know what these tools were. The things we now service design, discovered in the last 10 years, or invented, or co-opted, or whatever, right? And so, all of these things are new. Now, once we started thinking about ecosystem design, we started seeing it everywhere. The whole Facebook Cambridge Analytica thing, right? Who owns the governance there? Facebook claims they did everything properly, that Cambridge Analytica were the ones who misused the data, they didn't follow the agreement. Cambridge Analytica says, look, Facebook gave us this stuff and basically told us we could do what we want with it. So, who has governance? Who owns this? Who designed this? The healthcare crisis that we have in the United States, where we have insurers and hospitals and doctors' offices and patients and employers, who owns healthcare? Government? No. Insurance companies? No. How do we solve this? So, we can start to think of these as layers to a problem. At the lowest layer we have screen resolution, at the highest layer we have ecosystem. And what's interesting is that we're now beginning to get a handle on the sort of service design, organizational wide stuff. There's this progression. We have to do these in order, right? And that's because we haven't developed all the tools. The ecosystem one, that's the one that we have to deal with the tough challenges. The realization that we had is that you can't start solving the problems of the higher resolution until you've got your handle on the lower resolutions. Right? You've got to be really good at these lower resolutions before you can start working on the higher ones. I want to introduce you to an amazing person. This is Ariel Cannon. And Ariel Cannon was at the Mayor's Office of Opportunity in New York. She's now moved on, but she was there for a while. And she was tackling an amazing problem. She was tackling the problem of making a service design for all the services in the city of New York that help the homeless. 600,000 homeless in the city of New York. And she was working on this incredible project to just even begin to map out how all the services worked. And she took everything she could do from her service design work and she applied it to this problem. But it wasn't sufficient because the homeless problem is an ecosystem problem. There are 41 different agencies that work for the city of New York, plus about 1,000 charities that are involved in the situation, and all of these things have to coordinate together, and there's no clear governance. But she did some amazing work when she was there, and it dramatically improved the quality of life for many of those homeless people. Introduce you to someone else. This is Tracy Walker. We work together at the digital service in the White House. And she is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And she decided when we were there to tackle what is the hardest problem, I believe, in user experience: procurement. Because if you don't hire the right people, you won't get the right designs. And so she worked on redesigning procurement at the federal level. And the way she did this was just mind-blowing. But again, every agency works independent of each other. They all have contracting officers. There is a federal standard, but the federal standard is a set of guidelines. Every agency applies their thinking to those guidelines. And then you have all the people who are applying to work in those federal jobs. How do you coordinate all of that? And that's the problem she was working on. And I want to introduce you to Dana Chisnell. And Dana Chisnell also worked with me at the White House, but she went on and she is now a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And her curriculum is teaching future policymakers how to do design research. She teaches them how to actually research the people who the policies will affect. Because it turns out that's a new idea in government. And again, this is an ecosystem problem. And the thing about these things is that none of these people are working at the screen or application level. They're trying to apply organization, service design-like things to the work, but it's not enough. So they have to work at the ecosystem level. And if I wanted to apply a label to these three amazing people, I would call them pioneers. They are out in front of this problem. They are the ones who are trying to solve it. And they are worth paying attention to because they're doing really fascinating work. Well, as soon as we applied this label of pioneers to them, it brought us to the work of a guy named Simon Wardley. And Simon Wardley has actually talked about pioneers. He has this notion in this paper he wrote called Pioneer Settlers, Town Planners, and Theft of three types of folks: pioneers, settlers, and what he calls town planners. Now, I know this is very colonialist language. I am quite aware of this. And in fact, I popped a message to Simon saying, hey, we're thinking about the colonialist language around this. What are your thoughts? And his response was, when you come up with something better, I would love to hear it.
Appropriate for here, by the way.
Yeah, it's true everywhere. So, I beg your forgiveness on the colonialist language. I don't have something better right now, but let's just work with it. If you come up with something, Simon and I are very interested. But here's the deal. Pioneers are people like Dana and Tracy and Ariel in that they are exploring the new area. They are figuring out how to map what's going on. They are trying to figure out what the landscape is that we're working in. They're bumping into problems no one has ever seen before. And they're putting together real hacks to solve those problems. We know that they're not the things we need to do going forward, but they're trying things out, they're experimenting. Settlers are also brilliant people, but what settlers do is they come in after the pioneers and they start to come up with the basic practices. They're the ones who are part of what that is. And town planners are the folks who then start thinking about scale. How do we grow this area? They're the ones who think, in terms of, well, where are we going to put water pipes, and how are we going to get electricity to every place, and how are we going to put fire departments in, and then fire hydrants and all the things. They start thinking about how do you build this to scale for repeatable use. Whereas the settlers are just trying to invent practices that are repeatable. Whereas the pioneers are just trying to solve anything with any hack they can get. And so this idea of planners and settlers and pioneers is a really fascinating idea. And if we take these different things, we can actually map out when all that work happened, because we saw all of these things. The advantage of my being in this industry for 44 years is that I have gone through all these stages and I see the repeated processes. And back in the 70s is when we saw the pioneers for the screen level stuff, then the settlers and the planners come in. I was definitely in the pioneer and settler thing. I've never been much in the planning stuff. And then back in the 80s, pioneers, settlers, planners, and I again found myself in the pioneer group here. And at the organization level, there were in the 1990s is where we saw the pioneers doing their work, and the settlers and the planners. I didn't do much work at that level. And so we can see this. And now we have the pioneers for the ecosystem level. But we haven't met any settlers and we haven't met any planners because it's too early. We're still in the pioneering stage. But we're going to need them. And the question we had was, where are they going to come from? So, I like to poke at Design Twitter.
Hadn't noticed.
It's fun. It's something to do late at night when I'm having trouble sleeping. It pisses off my wife because my phone then buzzes for a while. Apparently the most controversial thing I ever put out in the world was that everyone is a designer. It was a tweet. This was the tweet that started it all. Anyone who influences what the design is becomes, anyone who influences what the design becomes is a designer. This includes developers, PMs, even corporate legal, all are the designers. And the funny thing is, when I wrote this tweet, I actually wasn't thinking I was out to poke the bear. I thought this was a blatantly obvious thing to say, and I thought I would get a lot of duh. But no. Since I learned it became controversial, now I'm poking the bear. A friend of mine, Sarah Brooks, said, you're going to have to start putting a trigger warning on this for people. And it gets some fascinating responses. So, the thing is that what Tracy is doing is design. She's rendering intent. And the people she is doing it with are procurement officers and contract officers. They are designing what their agencies will eventually deliver by deciding who is going to deliver that. Dana is talking to policy people, and they are doing design research on what future policies should be, and learning basic ethnographic techniques and research techniques and talking to people and realizing that's a whole new world. So in fact, everyone is a designer. Everyone is influencing the experiences that the people have. Here's the deal though, not everyone is a good designer. But this was true even before I said this. We knew this. Right? All of you are designers, not all of you are good designers. Sorry. Some of you aren't very good at all. You know who you are. But here's the thing. Everyone can become a better designer. And when we think about the process, what we're thinking about here is how we make better designers, right? And we have to do this at all the different resolutions. Now, there's this notion that's been promoted of a T-shaped designer, right? I don't know if you've heard this. This is an idea that the folks at IDEO have latched onto, and they've been making lots of noise about it, and other people have been talking about it. And the thing about a T-shaped designer is one deep skill, and and then a lot of sort of broad skills that you not really that good at. Right? And we can map these into how we think about resolutions. Like if you're an information architect, you're working at the application design stage. And if you're a user interface designer, you're working at the screen stage. And if you're a service designer, you're working at the organization stage. And I guess if you're, an ecosystem designer, you're working at the ecosystem stage. But this is not how real people work. This is not how real people are. People aren't T-shaped. I'd like to be a little more T-shaped. In general, people aren't T-shaped. Instead, people are broken cone-shaped. Right? In that at any given time, we have lots of different skills. And all the different skills that we have are define who we are and what we can do. But we're always changing this. We're always getting better at something. And when we think about teams, the way we have to think about teams is to potentially put all the different skills together. So what we want to do is sort of line all these things up and see if we have all the right skills we need to get the work done. And we can always add new skills and get good at them, and we can always lengthen them. The whole phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, is absolutely wrong. It implies a zero-sum notion of learning. That if I learn more than one thing, I won't be as good as if I only learned the one thing. If that was true, and I was an amazing interaction designer, and I picked up the ukulele, if I got good at the ukulele, my interaction design would start to suck. And I've never met a ukulele playing interaction designer who was bad at both. They stay home. This idea that somehow learning to cook will cause you to be bad at something else, that doesn't make any sense intuitively. Right? So, in fact, you can be a jack of many trades if you put the time in. You put the effort in. And what we've learned is that, in fact, we need to be able to span resolutions. And that is, in fact, what happens when we see things like UX UI designer. Because UX UI designer is a real thing. It is, in fact, someone who can work both at the application level and at the screen level. And in some organizations, that's what we need. We need someone who can do both. So we want someone who can do both things. So this is real. And with this, we can start to zoom out of the landscape. We can start to really look and say, where do we want to put our efforts? What do we want to learn to do? And we're going to need to do this to design the world that we want to have, because we need to work at all the resolutions. And that's what I came to talk to you about. So, just to summarize, we have to learn how to design at across organizational boundaries. This is the new frontier for us. This is where the pioneers are now working. And we have to realize that the problems change at every resolution, and the solutions have to change with them, and the skills that we have change with that. And so we're going to need different ones for each resolution. And it's okay if we try to learn all of them, because that actually makes us really valuable to the people we're working with. This ecosystem-wide thing, there's something there. I don't know what it is yet, but it's definitely something. And once we understand how to work in this space, it's going to be really exciting to do that kind of work. So someone's going to be the pioneers, we're already seeing them. Someone's going to take their work and become the settlers and start to make practice out of it. And someone's going to take that and figure out how we're going to scale it. And it's going to be really exciting when we figure out how to do that. And finally, it's UX design all the way down. It doesn't matter what resolution we're talking about. Design is still the rendering of intent. We are teaching this in our school in Chattanooga. Our first cohort graduated last October. I am proud to say that every student who started the program graduated, which means we have a 100% graduation rate. This is unheard of in adult education. And then every student who graduated got a job, a really good job in UX within 6 weeks of graduation. So we have a 100% placement rate. That also never happens in adult education. And we had projected when we started the program that the average salary for our students would be about 66,000 American dollars, and the average came out to be 86,000 American dollars. So we're 20,000 above that. So 100% graduation, 100% placement, $20,000 over the projected average. We're just going to stop because we can't ever do better than this. We are looking to start our second cohort this spring and a third cohort after that, which will be twice as big in the fall. To do that, we need to raise money for their student loan because the student loan program that we have is completely donated by people in the field and companies that work in the field to support the students. When the students, they borrow the money to pay for their education and to live in, because it's a full-time school, they have to pay for their living expenses. But when they repay the loan, we give them very humane loan terms. It's the lowest rates you can get for any school loan, and it's a 20-year loan and it's fixed rate. And when they pay it back, it goes to another student. It goes straight back into the donation fund and another student can borrow it. So they're always paying it forward. So they're very incentivized to pay it back. And so we designed the student loan system to constantly encourage new folks to come, and in particular, we are trying to get people into the program who wouldn't ever be able to afford a program like this because they don't come from an economic status where they can go to school like this and not have to worry about money at all.
Yeah.
So, if you want to participate in this, you can go to centercenter.com and you can hit the donate button, and every dollar counts, and it will pay for multiple students. Even if you just put in $1 donation, that would be great. If you found this the least bit interesting, I have a newsletter that we started this summer called UX Strategy with Jared Spool. That's me, in case you didn't know. And even if you get other emails from us, we don't automatically put you in new newsletters. So if you want this, you have to go to uie.com/strategy and just put in your email address, and we will send you the newsletter. And it talks about the things that we've talked about tonight and the stuff that's in the workshops that I've been teaching here in Australia. And finally, you can get more information on everything we've talked about tonight at uie.com. There's a ton of articles, and we have videos in our all-you-can-learn library from 377 UX experts. And also, you can connect up with me on LinkedIn. That's a great way to have communications. I respond to my LinkedIn messages. Sometimes it takes me a little while when I'm traveling, but I do respond to all of them. So that's the place if you want to talk to me or ask questions about stuff. I'm happy to do that. So please connect up with me on LinkedIn if you work in design. And finally, you can follow me on the Twitters where I tweet about design, design strategy, design education, and the amazing customer service habits of the airline industry. Thank you very much.
So how many people have their phone out right now doing that? Like that should be everyone. Thanks, Jared. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
Are you okay to do some questions?
Yeah. I just don't want to talk about the thing with the sheep.
We'll never mention that.
Okay.
That was definitely a private conversation.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it didn't happen.
We've got a hotline off the press
I mean,
right,
it happened,
ready to
but
go.
I wasn't there. I was.
At the ecosystem level, do you foresee needing different tools and techniques based on political systems? Because obviously an ecosystem, say, if you're working in China or you're working in the US, the politics and therefore the governance are so very different. Do you foresee needing very different?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, I believe that I mean, all of these levels have always had some sort of notion of social interaction to them, right? When you're working at the screen, you're talking about how people interact. You're working at a very sort of cognitive psych type thing. When you're at the application level, you're dealing with the psychology of organization. That's why information architecture, wayfinding, things like that. You know, so at every level we've had to deal with different things. So you get into the organization level where we're doing service design. You're now getting into what one might call politics. So politics is an interesting word. We tend to use it derisively to mean conflict. People say, I don't like politics. And what they really mean is, I don't like conflict. Politics is actually just dealing with the fact that different people have different agendas. And the people who are good at politics are ones who can find common ground, the overlap in the agendas, and then establish a way to get agreement to work on all of that, and then say, okay, well, here are the things we differ on, and then come up with a negotiated way, whether they compromise or they trade off, I'll do one for you, you do one for me, or they try to persuade, whatever it is. But it's that skill set of dealing with multiple agendas that is really what it means to navigate politics. And I assume that at the ecosystem level wide, there are going to be cultural politics, there are going to be nation-state politics, there are going to be society politics. I mean, one of the places where you look is, for instance, standards, right? So standards are a way of working at the ecosystem level. They're an interface between two organizations that has been negotiated. You can think of it as a sort of an API, right? It's a negotiated point where everything that happens on one side of the standard is independent of everything that happens on the other side of that negotiated point. So think about, for instance, how the power works. So I can plug in my laptop, I can plug in my hair dryer, which I need to use every day. And the power company does not have to know what I'm plugging in because there's a standard for what I can plug into a socket. Similarly, the power company can shift from coal to hydro, and I don't have to change all my appliances. That standard point becomes an isolation moment that allows either side to work. And that's a tool for ecosystem design that doesn't require governance more than just agreement. And so my guess is...
Interestingly enough, to even something in like fire, there is European, Australian and American standards.
To fire?
Yes, in fire safety.
Oh, fire safety.
Fire safety.
I was just thinking, fire is fire. I hadn't realized that we had come to a standard of fire. It just, that one burns, that one doesn't.
Looks different in fire safety. There are European, American, and Australian standards.
Oh yes, there are. And the way fire. So one of my clients is the National Fire Protection Association, which writes all the American standards, and they are actually a community group of fire professionals who come up with what the standards are. And when they write new standards, it's usually because something bad has happened somewhere, right? So some building burns down that everybody thought was compliant, and they do some forensic work. They discover that it wasn't compliant, or it was compliant, but there was some material or something that shouldn't have been used or wasn't understood, and now they write new standards. And so you're absolutely right. There are these different standards, and there's also a reason why I do have to adapt my equipment when I come to Australia from what I was plugging in the US, and I have to carry around these funky little angled plugs. What's going on with that?
It works better.
It works better.
It's safer if we've got a ground.
We have a ground.
That's 3 pin versus 2 pin. That's amazing.
Yeah, you know, okay. Whatever. It looks cool. You actually have the coolest looking one. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So. Yes, there are definitely things we're going to have to learn on how to design in that space for sure. We'll go with the man in the black shirt and then the woman in the white blouse.
Sorry. So, because it's not actually a question; it's actually a follow-up.
Okay.
To the question, to her question, I want to propose something above ecosystem, which is a cultural, like a cultural resolution.
Maybe, yeah.
Because just what you were saying, designing for different culture, different nationality, different. So like that, a lot of that has to do with like taxonomy and how to deal with different problems, and that's even more fluid than the ecosystem.
It could be. One of the problems of understanding resolutions is that we can't see them until we sort of figure out what we're doing at the lower resolutions. There very well could be other ones above. In fact, we're now seeing resolutions below screen, right? If you think of what a chat UI is or a voice UI, right? It's not a screen design problem anymore. It's a screenless design problem, and it has something, but we don't really know. And everybody who's working in those spaces are pioneering techniques, and none of us really know what good design looks like for voice interfaces and I'm sure there's something even lower than that that we will get to at some point. So yeah, no, I'm sure there are other things, and culture might in fact be what it is. I just can't see it.
So the context is actually I'm talking to a few other designers across the board to design for solutions for community problems. So for instance, trolls or information, false fake news, false information. So like it's a even higher level, and that goes across different languages. And
yeah, it might. I mean, the reason I'm just not being absolutely certain on this is that without knowing what the tools are for ecosystem design, we don't know if the tools would solve the problem for those problems.
Yes,
and if they do, then they're all at the same resolution, and we just now know more about that resolution. If the tools have to be changed because the problem is inherently different, then yes, there's a new resolution there. I just, we've exceeded the knowledge that I have at this point. But that's a really good idea. It's possible. My wife will be the first to tell you I don't know everything. My mother was pretty consistent on that too.
So I was going to ask, I suppose, how do you see this as distinct from what we might describe as systems thinking?
How is this different from systems thinking? I think systems thinking is sort of the meta of what we're talking about here, right? There are some things that are taught in systems thinking that I think are in fact the tools that we might be using in ecosystem design. But systems thinking works at all levels. So I am not sure. I think system thinking is somewhat orthogonal in its abstract academic form, which is its most useless state. But in the practical ideas behind systems thinking, I think what we're seeing is we're either seeing tools that will be used at that ecosystem level, or we're seeing tools that are used all there. And I think once we sort of get there, we'll be able to separate those two tools out, and we'll then have to come up with names for the ones that are horizontal and the ones that are vertical, and I don't want to be there for that conversation.
So I'm going to ask you follow-up questions to that one.
Okay.
So at what point, like you've been observing and participating and leading all of this for multiple decades.
Yeah, I'm an
numerous
old fart.
decades, I'm not going to count them. At what point did UX become around the digital interface and primarily recruited around the digital and the UX UI as opposed to the system and the ecosystem? At what point did that become a thing? Because it didn't start that way.
No, it didn't start that way, and it's not that way in my mind. No, it became that way because the people we now call UX designers, they were not needed before we had apps and sites. And when we had apps and sites, the organizations needed something. And somebody said, well, you should hire UX designers. And suddenly, there was this explosion. So, not literally an explosion.
Kind of.
Kind of. So here's an interesting tangent. In 1976, before 1976, human factors was sort of this academic, theoretical thing. It done a little bit of work for the military. There was a movement in ergonomics, but there weren't very many people. And in 1976, at the Human Factors Society meeting, where there were 300 people in attendance, the keynote speaker was one of the keynote speakers was the head of engineering for the U.S. Energy Agency, Department of Energy, who had just come through a retrospective postmortem of what had happened at 3 Mile Island. And 3 Mile Island was a complete human factors breakdown. It was a nuclear power plant where the rods, it was sort of almost Chernobyl ish type event. The rods had gotten overexcited, and the control systems and all the flaws in 3 Mile Island were because there were too many dials and too many switches, and nobody had done drills, and the human factors of the control panels were just all wrong, and we almost all died, the Department of Energy, out of that postmortem, realized that they needed to hire 1,000 human factors people. But there were only 300 in the world at the time. So that created this big boom for that. And I think the same thing happened when apps and websites showed up. Was that all these companies were like, well, we need UX designers. And then for some reason, everybody just assumed that that's what they were for, that they were just for that thing. And that was never the intention behind the notion of user experience. It was never the intention of limiting ourselves to what we do. But that's what it did. Of course, the schools then providing students that all they taught were app and, because they teach the minimum they can to throw them out into the world. And so that's what they were doing. So it turned out that everybody who had that title, or not everybody, but many of the people who had the title, only had the skills to do those things. And so that's why we now see this argument over what is it UX, is it experience design, is it service design, is it CX?
Is that purely a semantic argument, or do you see
Yes,
something deeper?
I think it's a semantic argument. We're designing for people, right? And we use the word users because there are two groups of people. There are the people who are affected by the designs we create and the people who aren't. And so we need a name for the ones who are affected by the design. We call those users. Some of them are customers, but some of them aren't customers. Some of them are employees that are organizations, and some of them are people downstream. One of my clients is an insurance company. They make an app for roadside assistance. They have a customer who bought the insurance policy, but then they have a whole bunch of other drivers in the family who didn't buy the insurance policy who are going to use the app. So what do we call them? We can call them insured, but no, that's a perfectly fine name. And my recommendation to teams is that you always find the name that is closest to the collection of people you're doing. So if you're designing for doctors, call them doctors. And if you're designing for doctors and nurses, call them hospital medical professionals. But find a name that works. But at some point we get to a collection of everybody who is affected by the design, and that's user. And so that's where design is. And so there are all the people whose lives are affected because of what we designed. That's where we're at. But yeah, I think for the most part, there's a semantic argument. Person in the black shirt. Did you ask your question?
I did, yeah.
Oh, okay. Then the lovely woman in the black shirt.
Hold on. Why didn't you stick with Unicorn Institute?
Why didn't we stick with Unicorn Institute? Actually, Unicorn Institute was our second choice. So we are authorized by the state of Tennessee to be an education a school, and they have very strict rules, and one of the rules they have is if you market and you're not yet authorized and they catch you, it's $1,000 a day fine, and they go back to the first time you used it in marketing and every day since. And so we didn't want to use the actual name of the school when we were doing our Kickstarter funding for it, so we came up with the Unicorn Institute because it was sort of cute and fuzzy. But the other reason we didn't use Unicorn Institute for the name of the school was that everybody got the idea because everybody refers to a designer who can do everything as a unicorn. But the reason we call them a unicorn is because they are mythical and they don't exist. And the fact is we are producing students who do this, so they will exist. So in fact, we immediately thought, well, this will be one of those things that 10 years from now we will regret we named it that. So, but the mascot is still a unicorn, and on their diploma there's a seal with a unicorn in it.
What makes a unicorn?
What makes a unicorn? Other unicorns.
Graduating.
That's meta.
Did your mother not talk to you about how this works?
I didn't have that chat.
You take a narwhal and a horse.
I was completely misguided through my little chat.
Yes.
Tim?
The woman in the lovely black dress.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is about, I'm wondering whether we're moving fast enough. So I'm curious about things like psychedelic therapy research and just the expansion of human consciousness, and I think about design. Sorry to hit you with the hard question at the end. But I think about design and kind of we're creating user faces and things like that, but what about the big issues of humanity, extinction potential, etc.? Is design moving fast enough in its evolution as a field to tackle challenges like that?
And do we need more psychedelics to get there?
Probably. Let's find out. Are we moving fast enough? The first thing that comes to mind is, are we even moving in the right direction? Because I think the reason that ethics is a topic today and it wasn't a topic, say, 5 years ago, is because I think we're beginning to realize that not everything we do is going in the right direction. And that's a conversation that we need to have. And it's a sign of maturity in a field. So when medicine first came about, when doctors first started it, you can sort of point around the mid-1800s, there was no discussion of ethics. Ethics didn't happen until the 1900s. Ethics in architecture didn't happen until the 1950s. So the fact that we're talking about ethics now means that we sort of matured to a point where just because we can do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And that is a good thing, that we are having that conversation and we are having that realization. And we are seeing people push back, and we are seeing organizations start to stumble because the people who are working for them are saying, yeah, this is not an organization I want to be part of if this is where we are. And you know, every company has values, and not every company lives their values. And so this idea that we want people to live the values that they state, or at least be honest about the values they actually have, that's really important. And so I think that that's key. Are we going fast enough? Probably not. Have we ever thought we were going fast enough? Probably not. Will we, you know, at some point we will probably all be extinct. So, you know, that's just the way it works. We're just racing against the clock. And so, I don't know, let's build a large spaceship, gather all the animals up in pairs, and...
What was that, Moses?
No, I don't think it was Moses.
Noah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wasn't Moses.
Same myth, different.
Sorry.
I'm curious, why do you do what you do? What keeps you motivated? What drives you?
Why do I do what I do? The short answer is that the company I lead back in the 1980s or 1990s decided that we had a mission, and the mission was to eliminate all the bad design things from the world. And why are you laughing? This is our mission. And so that's actually what drives us, right? That's what we've been working on. Throughout the 90s, we were just trying to figure out what that meant, like what is a bad thing versus a good thing. And
Where did you land?
Well, we've come up with all sorts of understandings, frameworks, definitions to work on this, and then now we're focused on how do you get organizations to sort of realize this. So that's why a lot of our work now is around professional development, strategy, and leadership, and all these sorts of things. Whereas, you know, a decade or two ago, we were focused on what makes a good screen, what makes a bad screen, what makes a good website, what makes a bad website. So we've been evolving that position, and we always saw it when we started. We saw it as a 100-year mission, which is an interesting challenge, right? How do you design an organization to fulfill a mission that will outlast the people who started the mission? Because I don't think I'll make it the full 100 years. So that's where we started, and that's what drives it. That's where we went. Sure.
So with the amount of people in this room, there's a fair few who will look at you and say, who inspire us. Who or what inspires you?
Who inspires
you, Jared?
Who inspires me? That's a great question. I mean, there's lots of people who I get really giddy about thinking about meeting them or hanging out with them. There are all sorts of people who I have both inside the field of UX and out. I have the honor of being friends with Don Norman. I think he's an amazing guy. Bill Buxton is another friend of mine who's part of it. You know, it's really weird to be friends with someone who inspires you, because you're it's not an equal relationship, I think. Oh, he likes me, though. But I got to tell you, working for President Obama was the best thing I ever did. And
why?
It was the hardest work I ever did, because the decisions we were making literally were life and death for millions of people, and we were deciding on things and working on things that if we did it wrong, people would die, and that sort of has some weight to it when you think about it. And and I gotta tell you, there are no MVPs in this way. Right? None of this, let's ship something crappy and see how it works. Well, that's sort of the way the new administration works. But
well, they ship something.
Well, they got a tax cut through.
And they repealed a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, they've undone a lot of shit. It's going to take years to fix this. Yes, sir.
You kind of touched on it almost with the ethics, but when you're talking about these ecosystem level designs, who gives these designers the power and who keeps them in check? Because they're making some big decisions.
Well, A, everyone's a designer. So, given that, whoever is in power is a designer, right? So, I used to tease Dana Chisnell when we were at the White House because she was the one who brought me in, and she was the first UX designer in the White House, and I used to tease her that she was the highest placed UX designer in the federal government, and she would turn to me and with a serious face say, "No, I'm not. President Obama is the highest placed UX designer in the federal government." And at the time, I thought that was a funny reaction to what I was saying. But now, having seen what has happened with the administration change, she was absolutely right. Right? The president is the highest placed UX designer in the government. So the question isn't who gives designers the power. The question is, how do we get the designers who have the power to do good design? And that's a very different lens to look at, particularly at the angle that we're coming from, which is if we assume that we can take anybody and make them a good designer, how do we do that for people who don't even realize they are a designer? And that's a key problem. Now, the second half of your question, which is how do we keep them in check, comes down to values and ethics systems, right? How do you stop people from running red lights? How do you stop? I mean, we have all these governance systems that are completely voluntary, if you think about it. We are completely compliant with the systems. We have some repercussions. If you are caught doing it, you could get a fine or maybe go to jail. But for the most part, we have these voluntary things, and it becomes completely obvious when you go someplace where the systems fall apart. I was in Recife, Brazil, and we'd come from a party at the conference, and they were taking us back to the hotel. We were in this car with a driver, an Uber or something, and the driver kept running red lights. And I finally said something about, hey, like, that light was red. He says, yeah, I know. He says, after 11 o'clock, you are much more at risk if you stop for a red light than if you just run it. Yeah. And so the system that I took as a regulatory system has completely broken by necessity, because to survive, they could not abide by the rules of the community, which is you stop at a red light. And that, I think, is the bigger question, which is how do we make sure that we've created a system that can maintain stability, a system of governance that maintains stability? Because once that stability is broken, then the rules start to fall apart, and it's every person for themselves. And that, to me, I think is as big, if not a bigger issue than how do we keep people in check. I think the ethical systems, if we do a good job, will keep people in check. Otherwise, we'd all be murdering people all the time. We say, I'm going to kill you. We'd actually do it. We don't do that 90% of the time. That I know of. I don't. I've barely done it at all.
Just that one time?
Right.
Taxidermy is the thing.
Yeah.
Hey!
How are we doing
Yes,
on,
it is.
How are we doing on time?
We're getting close.
We're getting close. Okay. You'll signal me. 5 minutes? Okay. Yes.
So, as someone who's been practicing design thinking and design research kind of stuff, one thing that I've noticed is like not everyone is used to concept of like design thinking, and one of the things that one of the challenges that I come across is getting the buy-ins. So like, have you had experiences like that, like when you're working in a administration and then working with different kinds of people. Like, how did you tackle that with different audiences? And if you didn't have that, what are the other challenges that you have as a design thinker?
Okay, let's unpack that a little. It took me a long time to understand what design thinking was. I didn't get it for a really long time. Because every time someone would explain it, I'd say, what is design thinking? They say, well, it's getting together multidisciplinary teams and doing end-to-end problem solving for the entire application. I'm thinking, okay, that's design, right? I did not understand what the difference was between design and design thinking, and I could not get my head around it. And, but I had clients, some of whom are highly placed, well-experienced people in big corporate organizations, brands that you know of, who would say, oh yeah, we've started doing design thinking education. It's making a huge difference in the organization. I'm like, what are you actually teaching? And that makes you, and then they would explain, teaching end-to-end multidisciplinary problem solving, in a conference room with Post-its. And design does not happen if stickies aren't involved. And so I'm like, okay, so well, why don't you just say you're teaching design? They said, because they explained to me that when you say the word design, people think aesthetics. They think color. They think what paint. We have a TV network in the United States called the Home and Garden Television, HGTV, and they. Are you fans? Okay. I don't know what we export and what we don't export. Why don't we put tariffs on that? That would be great. I could get behind those tariffs. They have television shows about design, and all the television shows about design are after the renovations are done. After you renovate the kitchen, then we'll pick out the colors and we'll figure out what the artwork is. But they're not, how do I make the kitchen more efficient? That's not the design portion of the program. And what the realization I had was that for people who I would call lay people, who are not trained designers, when they hear the word design, they're more likely to think of those scenarios than they are to think of end-to-end problem solving. And somehow sticking the word thinking after it changes it. Because it's like, it's cognitive dissonance. Well, this is design thinking. Well, what the hell is design thinking? You're thinking of color? What is design thinking? And now they're curious because of the cognitive dissonance. And so they're like, no. We go in a room, we put up stickies on the wall, we solve problems. And so it's like, oh, that sounds like fun, let's do that. And so that's what design thinking is, right? So it took me a long time to get there. And much longer than it took me to just explain it, and that took a long time.
The stickies are different colors, though.
The stickies are different colors, there is that.
And color-coded, of course.
The key thing is that when you talk about how do I get people to buy into design thinking, we're selling the wrong thing, right? We don't need them to buy into design thinking. We need them to buy into the problem being solved. Design thinking is just a tool. It's sort of like, a chef saying, how do I get people bought into blenders? I keep trying to get people to use the blender, and they're not using the blender. It's like, you use the blender when you need the blender, right? We don't need them to do design thinking. We need them to solve problems. So, in my experience, when we're having a conversation of I can't get people to buy into whatever it is that we're currently pushing, design sprints, design thinking, user research, you pick your thing. It's because we're not talking about the outcome. We're talking about the way we're going to get to the outcome without ever saying what it is. And they don't see the value in that because they don't have the outcome to appreciate the value from. So we need to go with the outcome. And that's it. I think that took me at least 5 minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for
Thank you, Jared. That was awesome. It was great to hear all of your insights and a whole bunch of answers to questions that followed up. I want to do a quick shout out to all of our volunteers. Our volunteers are in the room now, so put your hands up. We'll do a quick jump. Thank you. Thanks to Matt for working the cameras and doing the live stream. And we are now going to the Occidental, directly across the road for drinks.
And to continue the conversation.
We have a design meetup with, come on, go, you're migrating to the front of anyway. So with IXDA, with UX Club and anthropologists, we have the design meetup on the 5th of December. So get your tickets to that and see you then, otherwise see you in 2020. We'll also do installation and everything on sale yesterday, so be fast. Thank you very much, Jared. One last